Hello everyone, Caroline here. In today's video, I want to share 10 cards that I created with the Luxe Paper Block from Action. So this is the block I'm working with today. I received it as part of a happy mail from my sister in Germany. And this block has die cut sheets. It has vellum sheets with sentiments, partially in a foil, and it has one sticker sheet, and it has pattern paper, and this is a very sturdy cardstock actually. And the whole block is kind of Native American themed and very southwestern images. This is a very pretty one. It has like a dream catcher on the left bottom side. And here are all the die cuts. You have lots of little decoration pieces, focal points, a lot of feathers, very naturey images like little stones and butterflies and murals. It has also this tippy and arrows with flowers, frames. It has all kinds of stuff. And then it has those cute animals. It has this feathered heart, which is very pretty. And in the end, it also have another vellum sheet with partially silver foil on it. So that's the block, and here are now my cards. Card number 1. So for card number 1, I went with a kind of Bordeaux colored card base. I cut out 2 squares of 2 of the pattern cardstock, and I also cut out a frame, or used a frame die from my stash to cut out the circle. And I used holographic mirror card in rose gold that I also received as part of my happy mail, and it's also from Action. So I started out by roughing up the edges of my 2 cardstock pieces here. I'm using gray, this is hickory smoke, distress ink, and distress the edge of this so the white core disappears. And then I'm also going around the edge with this ink, and I'm doing the same thing with my other piece, this very light pink color, and I'm using tattered rose for this one. Then I'm getting out my watercolors, my metallic watercolors, and this watercolors is also a package that is from Action, and they're actually very, very good. They're very creamy, and they're very, very easy to water down, and I'm using them a lot for splattering. So I'm using this kind of pinky and greenish color to make my splatters. And then I'm getting this die cut, which is this little wreath with the flowers and the feathers. And I'm using this little pair of owls here, and I'm removing those little nips that sometimes appear when you take out the die cuts with my little paper tool. And I'm attaching the owls to my wreath here. And then I'm attaching this vellum circle in the back. I just want the inside of the wreath a little bit softer and not the holographic mirror cardstock. And then I'm attaching my foam squares here, so I give it a little bit dimension when I'm sticking this on my circle. Then I'm using this little sentiment, love always, and I'm just attaching this to a scrap piece of pearlescent cardstock. And now I'm starting layering my card here. I'm using first the dark gray square, and then the pink, light pink with the splatters, and then with foam tape I'm adding my circle here, my focal point in the middle, and then embellishing it with those little tiny flowers with little foam dots around my wreath here. And I'm cutting out my sentiment and round up the edges, and I'm attaching this right in the middle of my wreath. Then I'm taking my glossy accent and add glossy accent to those little butterflies in the wreath to bring them out a little bit more. And then I'm using my, this is kind of like a pinkish stickles, I think it's taffeta pink or ballet pink, and just adding some glitter. And I'm also using the blue Euro drops and adding them all around the card. And here is my finished card. Okay, card number 2. So for this card I went with kind of like a purplish card base, and it's a 5x7 card base. It's a big card, and I used one of my Daisy Maze dies. That's a stitched distressed tag die, and then I am going around with my glue stick here around my card base, and I'm gonna add some purplish, or this is more like a pinkish purplish glitter all around, and where I used my glue stick, that glitter gonna stick. So I have kind of like a glittery frame. Then I'm using again my tattered rose, and I'm distressing the edge of this piece of cardstock that I cut out with my die, and I'm using also a little bit of this Carbonet color for my die stress inks, and go around the edge as well. Now I'm using these two colors and add them to a piece of white cardstock that I will use as a background for my sentiment. Then I'm using some foam tape, and I'm using this large deer image, and add this with foam tape to my tag piece there. And then I'm adding this to my card base, making sure I don't touch the glitter, it's not dry yet, and add it to my card base. Then I'm pulling a few feathers, single feathers from the die cuts, and just add them to my, in addition to the other feathers, and I just want to bring in this orangey color as a contrast. And I also have those butterflies, and I'm making sure I cut away this white outline around them, around the antennas, and arrange them kind of on top of the head. And then I'm using a piece of a Sizzix double-sided double-sided adhesive sheets, and I'm using my scissor here and cut a piece, and then I'm using it and I stick that vellum piece on top of that. Then I'm cutting this out and I'm sticking this on this background that I created. And then I'm cutting this one, fussy cut this out, and also distress the edge a little bit and add this with foam tape and liquid glue to my card. And then I'm using my glossy accent and bring out the antlers here from that deer, and also the nose. And also using some diamond or crystal glitter drops, not glitter drops, these are stickles all around for some extra sparkle. Also add some glossy accent to the middle of the butterflies. And here is my finished card. Card number 3. So for card number 3, I created actually my own card base here with some, this is almost like an ochre colored cardstock, and I used a piece of glitter cardstock and also this Anna Griffin die to cut out 2 pieces of the pattern paper cardstock, and I used the Sizzix die and cut out a few foliage pieces that I thought would work very well with this card. Now I'm sticking on my glitter cardstock here, and then I'm using the color Mint from my die stress ink, and I'm going around the edge here of that first piece, and then I'm using actually tea dye color to go around the edge of that other piece that I cut out. And I'm going around that little animal here, I think it's a fox, and distress the edge, or just make sure I don't have those little nips, white nips sticking out. Then I'm cutting apart my sentiment here, and I glued this on to this double-sided sticky sheets again, and then glued this onto pattern paper and cut each word out. And then I'm attaching my first layering piece, and I used foam tape for that one, and then just liquid glue for the other one to create my base for my focal point. And then I'm adding my little fox, and then I'm arranging my foliage around it. For the foliage I used just scraps of pearlescent cardstock that I had in my scrap box, and I think those colors work very, very well with this card. And I'm just creating kind of like a little nest. Then I'm adding a foam tape to my sentiment pieces and add my sentiment. And for embellishing, I'm using just again my stickles, and these are the platin one, and here is my finished card. Card 4. So for this card I'm using a big square card base that I created out of like an orange red cardstock, and I also cut a couple of squares, a white cardstock square, and also cut out a black glitter square, and I'm just use them as layering pieces. And then I'm using one of the pattern cardstock, and since this cardstock is very sturdy, it's very easy to work with them and add some mediums on them. So I'm mixing here some iridescent glaze from Vicky Booten with some mint distress ink, and I also add some of the watercolor, like this bluish color and this greenish. And I want to color my iridescent glaze so it gets the color of the paper, so that it matches the color of the paper. So it is very light greenish turquoise color. And since it's iridescent, has this sheen to it, it looks very pretty. Then I'm using a stencil, and this is a stencil from Hero Art, kind of like a little tribal pattern here that I think fits very well with this kind of card. So I'm just adding this to give it a little bit more texture, and then I'm adding also gold splatters on it for some contrast. And also some blue. Then I let this dry. And when this is dry, I'm using my mint color here, distress ink, and go around the edge. And this is my background I'm going to use. So I'm roughing up the edge on this. And then I'm attaching my square to my card. Then I'm using a little bit of gold sewing thread and just, crumple it up and put it kind of like a little bit more texture on the back. And I'm using this a flower or cacti arrangement piece, die cut piece, and this will be my focal point, and I'm adding this with foam tape on top of my thread here on my background. And then I'm adding some bits and pieces, small pieces from that I got from the die cuts, and I'm just using those two feathers, and I have a couple of decorative pieces here, like those strips, pattern paper strips, and some smaller stripes pieces, just random pieces that I thought would work very well with this card. As a sentiment, I'm using this orangey reddish color Happy Day, and I'm attaching this with foam tape. And then I'm using the other piece of that strip here and add this to the top. It's almost like kind of a washi tape effect, if you will, but with cardstock. So, and then I'm just using my glossy accent and bringing out some of the plants here. And I also use some gold stickles here and adding some accents to the patterns. And here's my finished card. Card 5. Okay, for card number 5, I used a light pink cardstock base that I created in a square. And I use a piece of holographic rose gold paper, and I'm using my Daisy May square and circle die to cut out 2 pieces. Now I'm using another stencil, and I think this stencil is from Gina K. And then I am using my icing diamond glitter paste, and I'm literally pasting this over this holographic mirror cardstock, and the effect is really amazing. You have this glittery pattern on top of this holographic background. It looks really great. Then I'm using my other piece here that I cut out, and I'm adding a lot of ink to it. I want it to be darker, and I'm mixing here like a pink, and then my tea dye. I don't want it to be bright pink, more like a dull, old, like dull pink, brownish pink, more like a salmon color, if you will. And I'm adding water and then splatters of my watercolor to give it kind of a distressed look. And then I let this dry. And here are the 2 pieces I created. And now I'm going to add a piece of kind of like a grayish color. And this color will pick up the color that I have in my die cuts. Then I'm adding my holographic glitter paste piece and my other background piece. And this is so sparkly, it's awesome. Then I'm using this vellum, pearlescent vellum circle. I'm adding this. And around that I am just arranging my die cuts now. I have this one piece, and I'm adding my owl right on top there. And then I cut out kind of a little frame. This comes from an Altenew die set, and I'm adding this kind of like around my owl here. And then I'm arranging the other piece on the other side. Now I'm gluing everything on with liquid glue, securing everything, and then I'm adding those little flowers in addition. Some I use liquid glue, some are using foam tape to give it more dimension. Then I'm cutting out my sentiment, and this is the summer days. And I'm using again this kind of pinkish stickles to add some extra embellishing. And I have also like a Nuvo drops here in this light pink color and some glossy accent. And here is my finished card. Card 6. So for this card I created a card base, and the front is a little bit shorter than the back. And I cut out another heart from a kind of yellowish cardstock, and I cut pieces out of silver holographic cardstock to use as layering. So I'm attaching the first piece on the top, and then I'm attaching the smallest stripe to the bottom, and when you literally open the card you still have that piece there, decorative piece. Now I'm using again this darker cardstock, and I'm distressing the edge here. And then I'm roughing up the edge, and I'm gluing this on top of my holographic piece here. Then I'm using my tea dye distress ink, and I'm adding this around this heart that I cut out, and then I'm using my stencil here again, and this time I'm just stenciling through it with my tea dye to give this heart a little bit more texture, and then going around it again, make it darker. And then I'm using some walnut stain distress ink and going around this heart and around the other pieces, die cut pieces that I'm going to use for this card. And again, I'm using a sentiment out of that vellum sheet. And again, I'm sticking it on my Sizzix adhesive sheets and then onto some cardstock. And then I'm cutting those pieces out and gluing them again onto this gray pattern paper to frame it. And then I'm going ahead and layering my card here. I'm using first that yellow heart and glue this on with foam tape, and I do the same with this big feathered heart on top. And then I am arranging my other pieces around it. I'm using liquid glue and foam tapes or foam dots. And I'm using two of the feathers and attaching it to my sentiment. And I'm attaching my sentiment also with foam tape to the top of the heart, and I'm using a little angle here. And the last piece is then my butterfly, and I'm attaching this only in the middle, so the wing's gonna be a little shaped. And then I'm using my glossy accent and my stickles here and adding some additional embellishing. And here is my finished card. Card 7. So for this card I used 2 pieces of pattern paper, some embellishings pieces here, and a white card base. And I'm starting out by distressing the edge of this soft pink background piece that I cut out of the pattern paper, and I also do this with this mint colored piece. And then I'm using this frame, and I'm giving it also a little bit more color, and I'm attaching it to a leftover piece of this holographic cardstock. And then I cut away the excess, and then I'm using this fox with the flowers and attaching it to the top of my frame. Then I'm doing again my sentiment here the same way I did the other ones, and I frame this one on a piece of black glitter cardstock. Then I'm building my card up here. First I use my pink piece, and then I'm using, I cut out this little frame. Actually this is a leftover piece that I had, and I thought it matches very well this card, so I used this in this card. And in the end of this card I will show you the dies I'm used for this. Then I just layering my stuff here, first that other rectangle, and then this square with my fox on it. And I'm arranging some foliage around my frame here, and also the sentiment on the bottom. I'm using some crystal drops and just adding this to the top of the little foliage pieces, and also some white Nuvo drops. And then I decided to add a few more flowers in to bring out this pink in this card. And I'm just using a little flower die from Dress My Craft. And I'm arranging those around this foliage. And glue them on with my liquid glue. And then for the centers of my flowers, I'm using black Nuvo drops. They're supposed to look almost like little poppies. And this black will also bring out the black from the frame sentiment. And here you can see the dies I use. I use the Sizzix dies for my foliage here. And I also used this frame die for this decorative frame. And this is from Momenta. But you can use any things that you have laying around for decorating your card. That's what happens sometimes. Here is the finished card. Card 8. So for card 8, I want to create an easel card, and I cut out a bunch of circles here with my circle die, Daisy May circle die. And I started out to create my base, so I'm using one of the bronze pieces, brown cardstock pieces, and score this, and then attaching it to the other one. And I actually didn't do this correctly, but I thought I go with it because I didn't have any more of this brown cardstock. Usually the fold in the back should be on the lower piece of the circle. Now I added a circle on the back, and that's gonna be the place where you can put a message. Then I cut out this other circle of the pattern paper and put it to the inside. Then I cut out this pearlescent piece, and this will be my topper. And I'm gluing on this kind of feathery circle and also a piece of gold pearlescent vellum. And I'm using those 3 animals here that are bunched up, snuggling. And I'm distressing it and add this to the, to the middle of my circle here as my focal point. And then I'm arranging some feathers around them. And also some bits and pieces, smaller pieces from the dies, from the die cuts, like those little flowers and this little decorative buttons, so it looks kind of like a nest around them. And then I'm using my mint distress and my tea dye, and I'm doing the same as I did, I think, in my second card, and I'm adding my sentiment to this. And then I'm cutting this out and frame it on a piece of pearlescent, pearlescent cardstock, the same as I used for my topper. Now I'm gluing on my topper to the bottom part of my card here, and my sentiment will be my stopper. There. I'm just adding some brown glitter drops and also some glossy accent. And here's my finished card. Card 9. So for this card, I cut my card base out of like a Bordeaux colored cardstock, and I also cut layering piece out of the holographic rose gold cardstock, and I am adding this to my card here. And then I'm used this flower arrangement from my, that I cut away from the tippy there, and I am I cut out pieces from the pattern paper here, from one of the paper, and ripped it into 2 pieces. And I also use this frame, and I cut away the inside of it. And I'm distressing all my pieces here. And then I'm adding those 2 pieces to my background here. Using my tape runner to attach this. And then I'm attaching 2 of the hexagons pieces on the top and the bottom of this hole, if you will. And I'm using the sticker with the sentiment, have a wonderful day, and I'm stick it on a piece of white cardstock, and I will use this to as a backing for my frame here. And I'm attaching this frame with some foam tape to give it some dimension. I'm adding this to my frame. Then I'm adding my flower arrangement on top of my frame here, and attaching the whole thing to my card. Also attached my butterflies on top of the bottom of the frame, and now I'm just using some glitter stickles and add this as embellishment. And I'm also using some pink crystal drops. And some glossy accent for my butterflies and some drops. And here's my finished card. And here we are, card 10. For this card, I used a square card base out of craft paper, and I cut out 2 squares out of the pattern paper. Actually, one. This is not pattern paper, this is just a piece of cardstock that I had left that would match very nicely with this card. And I'm using here the same stencil that I used before, but this time I'm using some opaque crackle paste, and I'm doing this all over this piece. And when this dries, it's gonna give it some crackle effect. You will see this in a minute. Here I'm preparing my frame and my cardstock piece and all my die cuts. And I'm adding also some walnut stain to this pattern paper piece. Then I'm using this little animal here and let it look out through the frame. And then I'm attaching this to this other piece of cardstock, and also attaching those little flowers on the top, and also arranging my other flowers. Here you can see I'm using also this piece of tree and some flowers, and I'm adding some with foam dots here and some with liquid glue to give it some dimension, and I'm making literally one big piece here. Now here I'm helping a little bit, I help that crackle paste along by using my heat gun, and you can see here how this crackles very nicely. And I'm going around with my mint distress ink and also with my paper tool here to rough up the edge, and then I'm adding also a little bit of brown to match the card base here, the craft paper. Then I'm attaching my square, and my piece here that I created. I'm adding this in the middle with foam tape, and then I'm adding my sentiment also with foam tape, putting it to the top and then to the bottom. And I'm using some gold stickles this time to decorate my card. And glossy accent to bring out those two flowers there. And here is my finished card. So here are all my cards again in close-up, and I hope you find this video helpful, and if you have this block laying around, why not take it and make some cards with it? I have to say this is not a easy block. It doesn't have so many focal points. You really have to work with the smaller pieces and make little arrangements. I like all the cards that I have here that I created, and I hope you can maybe get some inspiration, and even if you don't have this block, maybe you can get some ideas that you can use for the stuff you have in your craft room. So, and it's always good to get, you know, stuff going or using stuff that you have already in your room or in your crafting stash. So I try to do this with my card always. When I have cards, I think like, okay, going to my stash and going to my paper box and see what scraps can I use from other leftovers and incorporate them into my cards. Well, I hope I see you in my next video, and until then, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I say bye.